Hi, everyone. I'm Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot. I'm here with Michael Schratt. Michael is a wonderful aerospace historian, and he is going to be starting a new show. And I'm giving him sort of a jump start here on my channel and showing him the ropes and how you do the technology and stuff. So I'm going to actually bow out. But he's a wonderful aerospace historian. He's an investigator into UFOs. He's been doing this for, we just figured out, what did we say? 24 years?
27 years. 27 years.
7 years. Jeez. So he is a real expert, and he was working also with Mark McCandlish, and he has some spectacular drawings of UFOs. He's got descriptions, and he's just going to go through his files, he has tons of files, like he could go on for now and for the next 3 years doing this show, okay? So I want everyone to support him, encourage him, and from here, and tell people your Facebook, where to find you on Facebook and where to find you on YouTube. Okay, Michael, when you're done?
Mm-hmm. Okay, sounds good.
All right, so I'm going to bow out here, so good luck and take it away.
Okay. Carrie, thanks a lot. I really appreciate the help. I've reached a point, I think, in the research here that it's really time to start getting some of this information out into the public domain. I mean, it's not doing me any good to hold on it to my files. As Carrie mentioned, we certainly got enough material here to take this thing to the next ice age. So there's no shortage of material. And what we're looking at here on this first slide is kind of a title to this book I've been working on. It's kind of a digital thing right now, but I'm going to make this available as a soft cover. It'll be very expansive. Everything's documented, so you'll be able to back this up with sources. So it's called Dark Files, A Pictorial History of Lost, Forgotten, and Obscure UFO Encounters. So we'll go ahead and start getting into some of these files here, if this thing will advance. Let's see here. Okay, here we go. All right, announcements. The visual aids used in this presentation are computer-generated forensic composite illustrations, which originated from actual UFO case files and eyewitness reports. So the bottom line is, I just don't want you to think that I'm pulling this out of nowhere. I want to reference where I got all this information. So here's the list here. CUFO, Center for UFO Studies, downtown Chicago. Now it's with David Marler. NICAP, APRO, MUFON, Invisible Residence by Ivan T. Sanderson. So if there's any skeptics out there that are on the fence, or if you have any family members that they're just not sure about UFOs, maybe they are, maybe they're not, I just invite you to tell them to just consider this book, Invisible Residence by Ivan T. Sanderson. It's full of these USO reports, unidentified submerged objects, and they're taken directly from Navy files. When you get done reading this book, I challenge anyone, repeat, anyone, to put that book down and think there's nothing to this. It's just not going to happen. After you read this book, I'm convinced you will be convinced that there is something to this phenomenon. That's how powerful this book is. And it's from Navy reports. Uninvited Guests by Richard Hall. It's another one of these very key books. These two books go hand to hand. Everybody should have these books in their collections. Next one, David Marler UFO Collection, UFO News Clipping Service, Wendell Stevens Archives, Leonard Stringfield Collection. Now, as most of you know, he was the foremost researcher on UFO crash retrievals back in '77. He gave a lecture at Dayton, which was the MUFON Symposium, started this whole UFO crash retrieval. Gray Barker UFO Collection, that's in Clarksburg, West Virginia. And then just good old-fashioned boots on the ground. So, what we're going to present here today is just not like, oh, I went to the internet and I did a save as copy and I threw that on my desktop and made a PowerPoint. No. It actually required boots on the ground, driving to the historical centers, putting on the white gloves, setting up an appointment, going into the files, pulling out the manila folders. That is research, not, Monday morning quarterbacking research ufology by sitting on your couch. That's not what we're doing here. So I'm going to provide you with all the references and source material so you can verify these UFO cases on your own. That's the goal here. That's the goal. All right, moving on. February 3rd, 1983, Mobile L11. This is the first case we're going to talk about here. And according to the APRO report on this, the primary eyewitness was driving home from a dinner engagement. It was around 9 p.m., February 3rd, 1983, Mobile, Alabama. She's driving down the road. All of a sudden, she hears this explosion. The car starts vibrating. It was very hard for her to steer the vehicle. So she pulled off to the side of the road. She got out of her vehicle, opened up the car door, looked under the vehicle. She thought there was something going on with the transmission. Transmission seemed to be okay. By that time, she got back into the car. She drove another half mile down the road, and it seemed to be okay. Now, she noticed off to the right, there was this clearing, and hovering about 40 feet above the ground, ladies and gentlemen, was this craft right here, about 210 feet long. It was about 80 feet high. We'll begin at the top here. And this top section had this transparent wraparound area that you could look inside. And she said that she could see these 5'10" humanoid-looking beings that had these one-piece tight-fitting flight suits on. And they were kind of in this antiseptically sterile environment. Their heads were a little bit larger than ours. She said that their ears on these humanoid-looking beings were just the bottom part of the ears. They didn't have top part. This entire thing was fastened by rivets, she said. And then she said that there were like hundreds of these porthole windows where she could look in from one side, clear all the way to the other. Now we'll go down from the top. Just from that transparent section with the humanoid beings, there was another transparent section. Below that, there were these large porthole windows that were lit from inside. Below that, there were these what looked like 6 foot by 6 foot sandboxes. And then protruding out of these sandboxes were these 3 foot diameter cylinders that she said looked like cannons. They might be cannons. We don't know. They could be cannons. Now, below those cannons was a door closing from right to left. And she was able to see just a hint of an asphalt black road, which was the base of this door. Now, off to the left-hand side, there was a wall, and she could see tubes, pipes, and cylinders on this wall. That's something that we've heard at least, I'd say 12 to 15 times on all these different cases. This whole thing about pipes and cylinders and tubes and silencers on the bottom of these craft, it just keeps on popping up again and again and again. A lot of these eyewitnesses say that when some of these craft flew over and they could see these pipes on the bottom, it reminded them of a Midas muffler shop. That's what these things look like. Okay, now below all that, there were 2 gondolas that had transparent section with the same 5'10" humanoid-looking beings. And then on the top part of these gondolas, there were at least 200 of these 12-inch by 12-inch highly polished mirror reflective devices. Now, while all this is going on, she could look through the craft, through these porthole windows, and she said it looked like she could see cross-beam and girders, kind of like a truss bridge. She also said it reminded her of the naval shipping yards on the East Coast where they built battleships, and they had these bulkheads and stringers. That's what she said that the interior of this thing looked like. So here's an enlarged view of the front. You can see that door closing from right to left, and if you look closely, you can see these pipes and cylinders on the bottom left-hand wall here. So that's this first case we're going to talk about. As the case ended, this thing slowly flew away, but she did notice there were beaming lights that shined up and then bottom, and this happened multiple times as this thing slowly flew across her location. Here's the actual APRO bulletin. This is the source, so you can verify this on your own. APRO Bulletin, Volume 32, Number 2, 1984. That's where this is published. This is the original sketch that we used to create the illustration that was done by John McNeil. Next one, USS FDR, 1958, Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Now, in this particular case, they were on a shakedown cruise. And it's interesting is that the USS FDR had a history of UFO sightings, not just the one we're going to talk about today, but it had a history of UFO sightings. And this took place around 9 p.m. at night, 1958. And it's interesting to note that one reason we might believe that this particular aircraft carrier had this multiple UFO sightings associated with it is because this was the first aircraft carrier to carry nuclear weapons on board. Okay, so time frame is late at night around 9 p.m. and all of a sudden there is this commotion below decks. Everyone is trying to rush up here. And in this photograph, you can see the flight deck here with all the fighter aircraft. And so, you know, we're parked over here. Everybody's trying to get up to the flight deck. There's swearing, there's chaos. People are tripping over something. They're trying to get up ladders to get to this flight deck. Something is going on. When they get there, there were 24 naval officers. Now, I spoke to Chester Grzinski. He died about a year and a half ago, so he's no longer with us. But he was there, and he saw what I want to describe to you here. When they got to the flight deck, you can see this. They saw a light approaching the aircraft carrier, and then they saw, this was no light. This was a 200-foot-long cigar-shaped craft, and you can see 25 naval personnel standing on the flight deck. It's approximately 200 feet in length. It had a series of rectangular cutout windows, and what's interesting is the people on the flight deck, these naval personnel, they could feel the heat coming off this thing onto their faces. So right there, ladies and gentlemen, we're talking about a close encounter of the second kind because it had physical effects. Not only that, they could see, quote unquote, beings walking back and forth behind these square porthole windows. Now, interesting, one of these beings pressed his face up against the window and rose his hand above his head like he was waving to the people below. Another guy just to his left just kind of put his hands up to the window. He didn't wave back, but the one to the right of him actually did wave back. So this is the original sketch by Chester Grzinski. That's the MUFON report, so you can verify it on your own. So we took all this information together, plugged in all the data, and went ahead and commissioned Tom Bogan to do full color rendering. And here's the enlargement of the sketch. You can see the heat coming off this craft affecting the people below. So as we mentioned before, this is a CE2. If you look at the bottom here, you can see the close-up enlargement with the being and his hand over his head like he's waving below. And so this is the rendering that we came up with. And we've got the island here on the aircraft carrier and these people looking up as this being is waving. But can you imagine this? I mean, it'd be great to be here. I mean, it'd be absolutely great to be here and see this in real life. So what I want to do now is, now before this thing took off at a very high rate of speed, it changed color to kind of a reddish orange color and then snapped away and took off like a spark on a grinding wheel. But I want to go ahead and enlarge this so that you can see what it looks like when we enlarge it. And now you can see this being waving back below. Now, I also will mention too this, when this thing departed, later on, there were elements of the intelligence community that went on board this craft, and they were investigating what was going on here, like pulling radar tapes. They wanted to interview people, and the excuse they were using is that there was, quote unquote, gambling below decks. That's the excuse that they used to go on board and investigate that. So this is the USS FDR case. Let's move on. Now, May 26, 1979, Colusa, California. It's about 11:30 p.m. at night. Primary eyewitness was watching a late night show. 11:30, it's late at night. And all of a sudden, now his wife and two kids were sleeping in the next door bedroom. All of a sudden, the TV goes out. Then the air conditioning goes out. So he thought, there must be something going on with the circuit breaker. So he gets off the couch, walks to the back of the house, opens up the circuit breaker panel. And the first thing he notices, ladies and gentlemen, is that the hand on the hair on the back of his hand, the hair on his arms, the hair on his chest, and the hair on his head not only starts standing up vertically, but starts crackling. The entire localized area was completely enclosed in the static electrical field that he could actually feel. So right there, we're talking about a CE2 case right there. Now he looks up and he sees this 140-foot diameter dish-shaped craft hovering above his location. and I want to describe it from the top down. The top dome of this craft had these ribs that had this concave depression. It looked like a lemon squeezer or these vintage orange juice squeezers that I'm sure you're familiar with. It had this strange rib section. Now, on the bottom of the craft, there was a beam of light that was shining down. But what's interesting is this is one of these cutoff beams of light. This is kind of somewhat familiar within ufology. Some of these craft, when they shine these lights down, they cut off halfway. Now, below on the bottom surface of this craft, there were 6 conduit pipes with frayed edges. And then on either side of those conduit pipes, there were these prong devices that came down. And when he looked off to the left, now this thing's 140 feet in diameter. He looked off to the left. There was another craft that was parked off to the right of the main craft, and it was sucking power off the 500,000 volt power lines, causing them to become cherry red. So right there, it's a CE2 case. Now, about a minute and a half after all this is going on, the large craft retracted these conduit pipes with the frayed edges in the bottom of the craft, and these prongs retracted 90%, but not 100% into the bottom of the craft. The second that happened, these gooseneck lights popped out with light shining down. And then at that point, this guy is getting scared for himself, for his family. So what he ends up doing is, and this is a drawing from the reports that shows you what this craft actually looks like. Here's a really good shot of this lemon juice squeezer with these rib sections. There was a large red light up front. Over here, you can see these conduit pipes with the frayed edges, and then you've got these different prongs here, and then the gooseneck lights that we talked about it before. So very good sketch, very good sketch. So he goes inside, wakes up his 2 kids and wife. They go to the back window. They open up the window, the blinds, and now they see that large craft flanked on either side of the 2 smaller craft that are approximately half the size of the large craft. They were causing these power lines to become cherry red as well. Now, what happened next, and keep in mind, this is all 1976 timeframe. That large craft went from a dead standstill, and if you look closely here, you'll see these low rolling hills in the background. That's about 27 nautical miles away. This large craft went from a dead standstill to over these low hills in about 1 second, and then came back in 1 second. So it had traversed over 50 miles in less than 2 seconds back in 1976, and it made no sonic boom at all. So who had the technology to do this? You can imagine that the family is getting very concerned now. So the father says, you know what? We're out of here. We're bailing out. So he, loaded up all his family. They got into the truck. The kids were still in their pajamas, and they're driving down the road trying to get away from this craft that's approaching them. That large 140-foot diameter dish-shaped craft is now following them. The report specifically states that they were going 90 miles an hour down the road as this large craft is approaching them. It goes over the cab of the truck, off to the left, which is the driver's side, and then back over to the right where his wife was, then back over to the driver's side again. Now, all of this is going on at 90 miles an hour. He eventually gets to the neighbor's house, which you can see here. And now this is the newspaper clipping, so I want to document my sources here. The San Antonio Express, February 6, 1977. Family tells of terror as UFO chased car at 90 miles an hour. 90 miles an hour. Can you believe this? All right, so they get to the end of the driveway here, right where the neighbors are. They slam on the brakes. This gentleman bails out of the passenger side door, or the driver's side door, starts knocking on the neighbor's door. They come out. And so you've got the 4 eyewitnesses plus the 2 neighbors that came out of their house. So there were 6 eyewitnesses that saw that large craft disappear. And this is all back in 1976. And I will mention that for a period of 9 minutes, the entire localized area of Colusa, California was in a blackout directly related to this craft. So this is the Colusa, California case. Very good case. Very good case. Move on. Now, this is my favorite Project Blue Book case. This is well documented. anyone is welcome to go to the National Archives in Washington, D.C., and you can verify this and get this case on your own. This is not my case. This is the United States government's own case, Project Blue Book. It's March 23rd, 1966. Time frame is about 5:05 in the morning. Primary eyewitness is a man named Eddie Laxon. He was a electrical engineer instructor at Shepherd Air Force Base. So he's driving down the road early in the morning. Sun is just coming up. He had his headlights on. And all of a sudden, ladies and gentlemen, he sees what can only be described as a bowling pin that's laying on its side. Some describe this as a fish or a perch-like craft. And we'll start at the beginning here. This whole thing was about 75 feet in length. So he gets out of the car and is looking at this thing. And it's blocking the road at a 45-degree angle. It looks like a bowling pin that fell over. The front part of this thing, which you can see here, looked like the bubble canopy from a B-26. Now, there were two high-intensity beaming spotlights that were shining down. And then shining forward, there were two high-intensity spotlights shining forward as well. Just aft of these spotlights, there was a doorway that was about 3 feet long and about 2 feet wide that had an air stair. Right next to this air stair doorway, there was a man. Let me repeat this. There was a man, not an alien, not an extraterrestrial, but a man. He was wearing two-piece military green fatigues. He had a baseball cap with the bill turned up. He was shining a flashlight on the bottom of this craft. The whole thing was extended off the ground about 4 feet by these pogo landing gear. So whatever this guy was doing, he was shining a flashlight near the bottom of this air stair door. Now, on the top part of this, there was a stinger or spine that tapered back to about a 10-inch diameter ball. And we've heard about these prongs or protrusions coming off these UFOs. I've got at least 20 cases of these prongs or spires or stingers coming off these things. There's got to be a reason for these. Now, aft of the starboard entry hatch, there was another 3-foot diameter transparent porthole that was divided into 4 equal pie segments. Just aft of that porthole window, there was written in black letters, ladies and gentlemen, black letters, TL 4768, written on the side of the craft. And I'd love to know what that means. Now, at the very back of this, there were flight controls that were too small to be effective for aerodynamic flight, but they were there. Some type of flight controls at the very back of this thing. At this point, Eddie Laxon is just, his mind is completely blown. He can't believe what he's seeing. So when he slammed the door after he had got out, that's when this guy noticed that he was being watched. Now, I'm going to take you to the next slide here. And you can see this is the original sketch by Eddie Laxon himself. This is not my sketch. This is his sketch. You can see the upper dimension here is 75 feet in length. Over here, the side dimension is 8 feet tall. You've got the 2 spotlights. You've got the pogo landing here. You can see the outline of the entry hatch with the air stair door. Also, the porthole window on the starboard side. And the TL 4768. Now, this is a rough drawing. This is a very rough drawing. So I spent a day going over all the testimony, over his sketch, the newspaper clippings, came up with a cleaned up drawing. And this is my cleaned up drawing based on Eddie Laxton's original sketch and report. And you can see the TL 4768 written on the side of the craft. Now, I will mention that whoever this man was who had these 2-piece military green fatigues he was wearing with a baseball bat when the bill turned up, he had these military ranking chevrons on his shoulder, part of his military fatigue, some type of military ranking insignia. That was definitely seen. In fact, Eddie Laxon said that if he saw this gentleman in town later that afternoon, he could recognize him. That's how close he was. So what happened next is this guy, this man with the baseball hat, he scurried up this ladder, he closed this air stair door, and then something very interesting happened. there was a high-pitched drilling noise. And that's something we've heard many times before. When these craft take off, there's always this like high-pitched drilling noise. We keep hearing this over and over again, this high-pitched drilling noise. And he, just like that Colusa, California case we just talked about, he also felt the hair on his head and the hair on his arm stood up. This thing takes off. It basically levitates at about 50 feet off the ground and then takes off like a spark on a grinding wheel, something like 700 miles an hour, made no sonic boom. This is all back on March 23rd, 1966. Now, as he is driving down the road, about a minute later, he sees a truck pulled off to the side of the road with a man standing on the floor on the running boards. And he thought maybe he needed some help. So he pulled off to the side of the road, was talking to this truck driver, and the truck driver said that some strange craft that looked like a perch or a tipped over bowling pin was following his truck. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've got independent confirmation, not only from Eddie Laxton, who was the electrical engineer at Sheppard Air Force Base, but we've got independent secondary confirmation from the truck driver. So we've got two sources for this case. Now, just so you don't think I'm making this up, this is the actual Project Blue Book index card here. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but over here it says brief summary and analysis, and they talk about observer spotted object parked on the highway in front of his car. They go down here, object was 75 feet long, nearly 8 feet from top to bottom, and about 12 feet wide. So here's the index card, length of observation 40 seconds, and you can verify this on your own. Here's the newspaper clipping. So I took it a step further. I went ahead and did the newspaper clipping for you here, and I've got this, the Daily Oklahoman, March 1st, 1971. This is Eddie Laxton. This is the gentleman that we're talking about right here. That's his photograph. It says, object sighted, now rude. So what do we mean by that? Well, by the time he reported this, and it was published in this newspaper clipping here, he got like hundreds of phone calls all around the world. And it went on for 2 weeks. It got so bad he had to unplug his telephone. So that's why he regretted even talking about this. Now, they did an artist rendition of what this craft looked like. Very well done. Guy did a really good job. But what I want to do, ladies and gentlemen, I want to take you to what this gentleman stated. And I think it's very important. I'm going to blow this up here. This is Eddie Laxton speaking here. Quote, what I saw was definitely not from space. The man was wearing fatigues and had a cap with the bill broken up like Air Force mechanics wear, Laxton said. It had common English letters on it. So, I mean, this is from the eyewitness himself. He believes that this, was something man-made. It had common English letters on it. He didn't think that this was an alien spacecraft. Very important to keep that in mind. So somebody made a breakthrough by 66. Somebody figured it out. Next one, April 24th, 1964, Socorro, New Mexico. Most people are familiar within ufology. This case with Lonnie Zamora, April 24th, 1964. Now, it's important to note that the credibility of the primary eyewitness, Officer Lonnie Zamora, was really never questioned, and that's what added the credibility to the case. All right, so we're going to begin here with a family that's on vacation. They're driving through Socorro, New Mexico, and off to the corner of their eye, they see this egg-shaped craft come down. It flies directly over their vehicle, right over the top of the car itself, like 2 feet above their car, and goes whizzing away. They actually go into the police station. They file a police report. And in their police report that you can read today, this family wrote down that you people really fly your planes low around here. That's a direct quote on the police report. So that was the first part of the sighting. Now, literally minutes later, Lonnie Zamora is chasing a speeder in Socorro, New Mexico. He sees what is most likely the same exact white egg-shaped craft out of the corner of his eye. He gives up speeding, and he notices that this thing lands in kind of a rocky outgrowth area with some low rolling hills. So he diverts from chasing after the speeder. He goes over this bumpy, unpaved road over a couple of low hills, and then he sees this egg-shaped craft that has 4 pogo landing gear legs, and it has an exhaust port at the bottom. But then he notices that there's 2 small-statured, humanoid-looking beings wearing these white coveralls. And he got within about 30 feet of these things. Now, when these 2 small-statured, quote-unquote, pilots saw they were being observed by Lonnie Zamora, they went immediately into the craft, and then a couple of interesting things happened. There was a banging noise, which I think could be a hatch closing. A few seconds later, there was a second banging noise, which might have been a latching mechanism closing. And then there was a frequency noise changing from low to high. And then there was a blue-colored flame that came out of the bottom of this thing, and then this thing levitated. So let's break down some of the things that happened here. Here's the newspaper clipping, the New Mexican, April 27th, 1964. And they talk about what exactly Lonnie Zamora saw here. Here is the insignia that we've all been seeing for well over 50 years now. This is the alleged insignia that was seen on the side of the craft. So if you take this insignia and you rotate counterclockwise 90 degrees, you end up with this. So you've got this umbrella with a TB, a slash mark, and then this horizontal slash mark. You rotate the whole works 90 degrees, you end up with this. Now, if you rotate the TP 90 degrees clockwise and you shift this slash mark, you end up with this. And if you transpose those letters, you end up with this. So you can all figure out what that means. So it's always interesting what we're dealing with here. All right, now, I'm here to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that what you saw on the previous slide, what we've all been led to believe, even what Lonnie Zamora had sketched out, is not the actual insignia. The actual insignia, ladies and gentlemen, was an inverted V with 3 hash marks. This is the correct insignia that was seen by Lonnie Zamora on April 24th, 1964 on the side of this craft. All right, now how do we know this? I posed this question to Ben Moss, who wrote this book that I've got on the screen here. Not of This World, the 1964 Socorro UFO with Humanoids, Witness Policeman Lonnie Zamora. So I'm just going to read you what I had worded to this author here. Why did Lonnie Zamora sign off on a fake symbol? The symbol was changed by U.S. Air Force Major Holder for the simple reason that providing a fake symbol, if any other cases came up and a witness reported the fake umbrella symbol, then they would know that the witness was lying. By Lonnie signing the fake symbol, maybe drawn by Holder, Lonnie was signing a contract with the government to keep his mouth shut on the symbol. It was country, God, then family in those days. Email from Ben Moss, November 22nd, 2020. So that's the reason why we haven't been getting this correct signal all these years. It's borne out here in this email. So here's the question. Where did this take place? It took place in New Mexico. Okay, Socorro, New Mexico. Now, I've got this map here. This is the outer perimeter of White Sands Missile Range. You can see this dashed line going all around here. That's White Sands Missile Range. Now, if you look at the upper northern part of the boundary layer of White Sands Missile Range, and you look to the left, you'll see Socorro, New Mexico. That's where all this took place. Now, if you go down to the bottom here, ladies and gentlemen, you'll see the scale in miles. You transpose that up to where we just were. The Socorro, New Mexico, Lonnie Zamora, white-colored egg-shaped craft incident happened within 5 miles of the west perimeter of White Sands Missile Range. I think that's very important. We could be looking at a test flight that had a problem or issue. Maybe they solved it in time and then they took off. But the fact that it's so close to the border of White Sands Missile, I don't think is a coincidence. So let's go over some of the points here. Number 1, object was seen within very close proximity to White Sands Missile Range. We just talked about that. Number 2, object featured retractable landing gear. UFO featured inverted barn landing gear pads with sharp 90-degree straight corners. That's something we're going to look at here in a minute. Number 4, a mysterious metallic slam noise was heard just prior to liftoff and departure. Is that a door hatch closing? A second mysterious metallic slam was also heard just prior to departure. Is that a latching or locking mechanism engaged? That's a question I always wondered. 6, a very loud roar was heard prior to liftoff, a change in frequency from low to high. And then number 7, a blue flame was seen coming from the bottom of the craft as it lifted off the ground. So ladies and gentlemen, think about what we've got here. We've got a metallic slam noise. We've got a second slam noise. We've got a latching mechanism, perhaps, a very loud roar, and then blue flames coming out of the bottom of it. Does this sound like an extraterrestrial spacecraft that's 100 million light years away and, could be a billion years advanced? This is sounding very mechanical. This sounds very man-made here. Let's move on. Now take a look at this illustration from the book here of the landing pad. It's a very interesting configuration here. Kind of looks like the top of a barn, but inverted with the roof pointing down, right? So let's move on to the next one. You can see from the book here, page 208, Not of This World, that's the outline. It made a female impression into the actual soil here, and that's the dotted line that you see here. So if you take that information of this landing pad and you do a SolidWorks model of it, and this is the enlargement that shows you what this thing looks like, does that look like the landing pad of an extraterrestrial spacecraft? So let's make a model of this thing. And that's what we've got here. Socorro, New Mexico landing pad detail. Ladies and gentlemen, I present this article to you. Does this look like the landing pad of an extraterrestrial spacecraft? I mean, look at these 90-degree corners. Look at these flat surfaces. Look at this angle in here, perfectly milled. It looks something that was made on a CNC machine. And then I took it a step further. I did an AutoCAD drawing, and you can see here, I've shown you the 90-degree corners per the own impression. I'm not making this up. This is directly from the impression made in the soil. Sharp corner here, 90-degree corner here. You've got another 90-degree corner here. And as you know, in nature, you very rarely see these sharp 90-degree corners. You can take a look at a bird's wing. You could take a look at a pine cone. You could look at the ocean waves cresting on the beach. They all have curvature to them. Very rarely would you see these 90-degree corners in nature. That's another identifying fact that we could be looking at a man-made technology here. All right, let's move on. May 26, 1967, Falcon Lake, Canada. Primary eyewitness is Stephen Mekulik. Now, he was a rock hound. He was a collector of gems and minerals, and he was out on a hunt one day. This is May 16, 1967, and he noticed that there was these birds that were flying away next to his location. He looked up, because that was the disturbance that started all this. He looked up and he sees 2 of these 40-foot diameter dish-shaped craft. One of them continued hovering. The other one landed about 200 feet from his location, and it sat there for about a half an hour before he even got close to it. So he was looking at this thing. It had this polished aluminum exterior. It had about a 3-foot protrusion dome on the top of it. Keep in mind, he had thick leather gloves on. He had a thick shirt on. He also had jeans and boots on, and he had a welder's goggle on so that he wouldn't have any chips of rocks going into his eyes. So he's getting close to this thing, and he notices that there is about a 3-foot long by 2-foot wide entry hatch, and then about 10 degrees it would be clockwise on the vertical axis. He sees another, looks like a hatch, but this was 8 inches by 6 inches, and it had these perfectly evenly drilled 1/8-inch diameter holes, like in this perfect pattern. So he ends up walking up to this craft, and he looks inside, and there's this violet colored purple light coming out of this hatch, and he can hear these languages or these voices, and he didn't know what the language they were speaking in, because there was this whistling noise like the whipping of the wind, or this whistle that he could hear from this craft itself. So he couldn't make out exactly what language they were in, but he knew that it was some type of a human language. So he responded in English, he responded in Spanish, he responded in Russian, and also in Polish, but there was no answer. There was just this continuous voice being heard. Now, at that point, this entry hatch closes and the craft takes off, I would say about 12 inches off the ground. And we've done an enlargement of him looking inside. This is courtesy Tom Bogan. You can see this purple colored light coming out. This craft basically lifts off, rotates, and then that small exhaust hatch with the pinprick holes lines up perfectly with his chest. And there is this hot gas, ladies and gentlemen, and Stephen Mekulik gets burned. His clothes catch on fire, and the hole pitch pattern of these 1/8-inch diameter holes basically burns a pattern onto his chest that continually, till the day he died, re-emerged and then kind of went away and then re-emerged later. So this is a CE2 case, ladies and gentlemen, because it actually had physical effects. He threw up after this. He wrote a book describing this encounter. There were other eyewitnesses that also saw this as well. And we'll do an enlargement of what the burn marks look, and you can see it's basically identical to the hole pitch pattern on this exhaust port again. Here's some of the original sketches that went with the case itself. They show him looking inside as well. And then here you can see the actual pitch of the burn marks that match the exhaust port, which is about 8 inches by 6 inches. Very interesting case. And there were radioactive debris left over that was actually sent to the University of Manitoba for analysis. Now, I spoke to my friend who used to work with me, and Antonio Hunes. He actually procured the photograph that you're seeing here. This is kind of a world exclusive, official Falcon Lake landing site photo from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. And you can see here the outline of where this craft came down. You can see the circular outline is different than the surrounding area. This is actually where this thing came down. So again, CE2 case because it had physical effects. All right, here is the Edmonton Journal, May 24th, 1967. Foul smell persists. UFO sighter suffers chest burns. This is Stephen Mekulik and his sketch that he drew of the craft. May 24th, 1967, Edmonton Journal is the reference. We'll move on to the next case here. January 1st, 1970. Interesting case, well documented. Two skiers are going down the slope, and off to the distance, about a quarter mile away, they see a cloud that's making this wrapping around arc looping maneuver. It actually ends at kind of a clearing, and they see this cloud. So they ski up to this cloud that's moving. I mean, when do you see this cloud moving and then doing this arc motion? It actually stops over a clearing. So they ski up to that. They're about, I would say, about 10 feet away from this cloud, and it's emitting this kind of a reddish glow to it. All of a sudden, there's a bright flash of light, and then this light comes down from the center of whatever this thing was. It emerged from the bottom of the cloud, and it was about a 10-foot diameter dish-shaped craft that had a dome on top. It had 3 half hemispherical domes on the bottom, and then this beam of light came out, and then they saw this small, what could only be described as a garden gnome, ladies and gentlemen, this garden gnome. He was about 3 feet tall. He had this crinkly, aged face. He had claws for hands. He was wearing a one-piece, tight-fitting green flight suit. He had green boots on. He had white leather gloves. He had a cone head top hat. And then the eyewitnesses said that whatever this thing was, it was carrying what looked like a camera device. There was this large lens in front, and he was moving the camera device from one skier to the next like he was taking photographs. This went on for about 30 seconds. Then there was this big, bright flash of light, and then that same reddish pink-colored fog, and then this thing disappeared. The man disappeared, and also the craft disappeared as well. Now, here's where the problem started. One of these gentlemen could not even basically stand at this point. He had to be unbuckled from his skis and helped back a quarter mile back to the ski lodge. He also began throwing up and vomiting. So again, this is a CE2 case because of the physical effects, and also a CE3 because they saw some type of alien or extraterrestrial being. So that puts it in a completely different category. This is January 1st, 1970. Here's the original source, Gray Barker UFO collection. That's Clarksburg, West Virginia. That's the actual sketch that went with the report. Next one, January 1st, 1970. This is British Columbia, Canada. And if you look at the left here, you'll see a photograph of Nurse Doreen Kendall. And this is the hospital there. And very interesting case, well documented. We've got newspaper clippings to back this up, and also the testimony from the nurse, Doreen Kendall. So it's a little bit later in the afternoon, and one of her patients was getting restless. So she went into the room, and she thought that the room might be a little bit too hot. So she was going to open the blinds and then open the window to let some cool air in. So when she gets to the window, she pulls back the blind, and she sees this. It's hovering right outside the window, about 40 feet outside the window. This thing was about 50 feet off the ground, and this thing is a dish-shaped craft, 50 feet in diameter. There was a clear, transparent bubble canopy on top that had these, what she said, they had very good physiques. That's the wording she used. It also had a bracelet of lights going around the outer circumference of the craft. And these two beings were standing, and she could see stools or bar stools next to where they were standing. In back of these two beings that had these black one-piece tight-fitting flight suits, there was a control panel or instrument panel that had buttons and switches and levers and dials and display screens. Now, if you look at this one on the far side, when he noticed that he was being watched by the nurse, he turned around, he tapped the shoulder of the nearer being, and he turned around, he pulled a lever, and this whole thing flew away at kind of a medium rate of speed. And this is a well-documented case. Here is the newspaper clipping, Times Colonist, January 5th, 1970. Craft hovers 50 feet, human-like pair and saucer. Again, Times Colonist, January 5th, 1970, so that you can verify this on your own. All right, we'll move on to the next case here. And this is a case that even the skeptics and debunkers, I'm talking about Philip Klass, even Philip Klass, to his dying day, he could not debunk this case. This is Mansfield, Ohio, October 18th, 1973. There were 4 people in a Huey helicopter. The co-pilot noticed this red light approaching the helicopter, and so he alerted the pilot. The pilot saw it. The closure rate was 600 miles an hour, so he immediately pulled back on the throttle. He put the craft into a dive. They were about 2,500 feet altitude when this began, and this whole incident took place within 6 seconds. This is a very rapid sighting here. Within 6 seconds. So he pulls back on the throttle, puts the helicopter into a dive, and now they're at about 2,000 feet, continuing to lose altitude. They're at about 1,500 feet, and then all of a sudden, they see this 50-foot long cigar-shaped craft with a red light on one side, a white light on the other side, and then at the 1,500-foot mark, this thing is hovering about 200 feet above them. A green beam of light shoots out from the bottom of the craft, hits the helicopter. At this point, they're at 1,500 feet. The helicopter starts rising, and they get to 3,500 feet above ground level. There's a thump, and then this green light disappears, and this happened within 6 seconds. All 4 crew members in the helicopter have no recollection of feeling any G-forces, feeling the feet, the feeling that you get on the seat of your pants when you're in a plane and the whole thing goes up, you can feel the G-forces. They felt none of this. It's like they were in a gravity hill and they were lifted up, but they didn't feel anything whatsoever. So they went from 1,500 feet altitude to 3,500 feet altitude in about 5 seconds. That's just not something normal. That's not something you can fake. Ground observers saw it as well. And as we mentioned before, even Philip Klass could not debunk this case. Here's fate, August 1978. Major Coyne, who went all the way to the United Nations on this with Jalen Hynek. UFO, the true story. It's going to ram us, the pilot thought, and suddenly it stopped. So here's their illustration of what they came up with. This is the Daily Call, October 22nd, 1973. Helicopter crew estimates the UFO speed at 600 miles an hour plus. That's talked about in this article here, so you can verify that with the newspaper clipping. And here's Colonel Coyne. He's all the way to the right. And you've got Jacques Vallée, Jalen Hynek, and then also Eric Gary was there as well at the United Nations back in 1978. So this case went all the way to the United Nations. Next one, late August 1970, Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Now this was a chiropractor who was riding a horse at the time, and he saw this cloud approaching his location. The horse started going crazy, and then emerging from the bottom of this cloud is a 40-foot diameter disc-shaped craft. It had a blue coronal discharge around the leading edge of the craft. And then it also had these counter-rotating vents or exhaust areas with about a 10-foot diameter inverted dome on the bottom of the craft itself. Now we'll go ahead and take you to the drawing here. You can see the 10-foot dome and then these counter-rotating vents or exhaust ports on the bottom of the craft. This went on for about 2 minutes. Then whatever this craft was emerged back into the cloud, and then the craft and the cloud departed at a slow rate of speed. So again, who had the technology to do this? No visible means of propulsion, no ailerons, no wings, no engine. This is something very interesting. Who had the technology to do this? Now we want to talk about astronaut Gordon Cooper. He had 2 sightings, and we'll just break this down. Number 1, he wrote a personal letter to the United Nations regarding UFOs in 1978. Number 2, he had an attempted UFO intercept over West Germany in 1951. And then number 3, he was involved in a UFO landing case at Edwards Air Force Base back in 1957. So let's break these down here. And this is reference for this is Leap of Faith by Gordon Cooper. You can read about this in his own book called Leap of Faith. So it's West Germany. It's 1951. He was stationed at the air base here, and it was the meteorologist at the Air Force Base in West Germany back in 1951 that alerted the squadron, including Gordon Cooper. And this was before he became astronaut Gordon Cooper. The meteorologist said and indicated that there were fleets of UFOs flying over the airbase. This happened for 2 consecutive weekends. So Gordon Cooper talked to his wingmen, and they climbed into their F-86s, and they went up at about a 45 to 60 degree angle, trying to intercept these fleets of UFOs. Now, he could definitely see they were silver metallic in color. They were saucer shaped. They had a dome on top. But an attempted intercept was completely impossible, because these things could turn on a dime. They could make a 90-degree right angle turn. They could fly backwards. So an intercept was completely out of the case. But we have the testimony from Gordon Cooper. He was later a Mercury 7 astronaut, credible witness talking about these craft itself. Now, let's go to the second one here. Speaking of UFOs, this is the Corvallis Gazette-Times, October 11th, 2004, where he talked about this. And we'll get into what he mentioned here in a little bit later on here. This is from the Gazette-Times. This is earlier in 1951. Cooper and other personnel several times cited an entire formation of circular objects passing over their Air Force Base in West Germany. Quote, "We never could get close enough in our Sabre jets," so that illustration that I showed you prior to this, that is correct, "to pin them down, but they were round in shape and very metallic looking." From the Times, October 11th, 2004. So let's go to the next one here. UFO landing at Edwards Air Force Base. This is 1957. The scene here is Edwards Air Force Base. They're on Rogers Dry Lake. and they are setting up the installation of precision landing equipment. And they have motion picture film reels. They've got still photography cameras. All of a sudden, this about 20 to 20 foot diameter dish-shaped craft hovers over the dry lake bed. They're about 50 yards from it. There's two men who are setting up this equipment with the cameras. It extends this tripod landing gear. The whole thing sits on the dry lake bed for about 60 seconds, then hovers above. The landing gear retracts, and then this thing flew away. And ladies and gentlemen, they caught this all on film. They got it on both motion picture film reel and also still photography as well. These two men involved in this incident, they took this film back to Edwards Air Force Base to the film developing lab. That's where Gordon Cooper was involved. Now, he was instructed to develop the film, but do not make prints. But he was never told not to look at the film. So he looked at the motion picture film reel. It was good quality film reel. He did call the Pentagon. The Pentagon, he was told to put the film, both the print film and also the motion picture film reel, into a pouch that had a lock on it, and it was sent directly to the Pentagon. And from there, ladies and gentlemen, we don't know where this film went. Where is this film? Where is the prints that were made? 8x10 black and white glossy. Where is the print film? Where is the motion picture film reel? And where are all the other films and photographs they took over the last 60 years, 70 years, maybe 80 years? Where are all those? There's got to be a vault in the Pentagon where they keep all this. Where is this? How do we get access to it? And it's this kind of evidence that we're going to need within ufology to continue to move the ball forward within this field. Nothing short of that is going to do it. We're going to need to get access to that vault and those film reels to really move this field forward. So this is what I've prepared for this presentation. I've tried to document my sources so you can verify this. I certainly want to thank you for your attention. And Carrie, thank you for your assistance.
All right. Thank you, Michael. Incredible stuff. And everyone, please do support Michael. He's gonna create a place where you can watch all his videos, I think on YouTube and on Facebook, of his own Facebook. And I'll also be putting this up on my website, this first show, just to help him out. But he's really launching his whole sort of 27 years of research is going to be brought to the public, and it's about time. So, Michael, thank you so much. It's wonderful to have you here. Any last parting words before we close this down?
Yes, certainly. People can reach me by email. People can reach me by Facebook, and I'm going to continue to put out these illustrator reports fully documented. And, the goal here is to make these cases come alive and then release them to the public. That's the goal.
Okay. Do you have any written card with the email, Facebook, and YouTube links, or how do they find them?
I can provide you with an email, and we can put that link to this presentation for sure.
Okay. So we'll put that out on the page for Michael that we've already got set up on my website, and people can find you. If they were to, search your name, you've been interviewed for years by other people, sure, as well as me. I've interviewed you dozens of times. Some of those seem to have disappeared, but some of them are still on my Odyssey channel. I've got even probably radio shows with you. Also, just want to say, if they search your last name, it's SCH, right? SCHRATT?
RATT, that's correct.
Okay, so if they search YouTube, will they find you there?
They'll find me. They'll find me.
Okay, great. And and the same with Facebook, I imagine, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay, very good. So thanks everyone for watching. Please do support Michael. Michael, do you have a Patreon or a PayPal?
I do have a PayPal, but I do not have a Patreon.
Okay, we'll get your PayPal links so that people can support you financially. Michael has to buy some equipment to make broadcasting possible. He's got to get a good mic, and he also needs to get I guess, whatever broadcasting might have to get a Zoom account and this and that. He works full time right now. He can't say where. It's all very secretive because he could get in trouble for doing this, but we're hoping for the best. And we want to keep him employed as long as he can be employed in the conventional, in the aerospace industry. I think we can say that at least. Yeah?
Could neither confirm nor deny.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Thanks everyone for watching. Bye-bye.
Thanks.